think about what was the determining factor that made that a real success or a problem. Was it people or a person, or was it a process that particularly drove that outcome? And most of the time when I ask this question, I say, yeah, it was that person or it was that group of people that really determined the outcome. And if that's true, then project delivery is as much about, if not more about people than it is about processes. And that for me is a huge misconception that exists.
Hello and welcome to Manage This, the podcast by project managers for project managers and anyone out there trying to keep their projects and their sanity on track. We're thrilled to have you with us. I'm Wendy Grounds, and of course with me is Phil Yates. If you're enjoying the show, we'd love to hear from you on our website, velociteach.com, social media, or your favorite podcast app. Your feedback helps us keep inspiring and supporting project managers just like you. And if you've got questions about our podcasts or project management certifications, we're here to help. Don't forget, you can earn free professional development units from PMI just by listening to this episode. Stick around until the end and we'll tell you how to claim them. Our guest today is Professor Adam Bodison. He is an extraordinary guest who's a trailblazer in the field of project management. He is the Chief Executive of the Association for Project Management, the APM, and I'm sure some of you have heard of that. Prof. Bodison has been revolutionizing the project profession. He has been a leader in adapting project management to meet the challenges of our complex world. He's committed to showing how project management applies across sectors, from education to nonprofits. His work goes beyond the traditional view of project management. Adam works to highlight its economic value and push for its recognition as a profession equal to other established fields. Let's dive into today's episode and see what tools, tips, and stories we can add to your project management toolbox. Hi Adam, welcome to Manage This.
Hello, and thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it is so great to talk to you. You have a background in many varied things, but one of them is project management, and we'd love to know how you got into project management. Where did it start for you?
Yeah, so I've been Chief Executive of the Association for Project Management for 3.5 years, and that's the only chartered association for the project profession in the world, something we're extremely proud of. And I guess prior to that, my background has been as an educationalist. I've been involved in member associations and professional bodies for about a decade, including 6 years as Chief Exec of the National Association for Special Educational Needs. But the reason I kind of got involved in project management was because I was looking to do something pretty broad and pan-sector, having spent a career very focused on schools and education and probably becoming pigeonholed, if I'm honest, as a bit of a specialist in that area. So I wanted to broaden out. But what a move. What a brilliant profession this is. And you know what? I thought that I hadn't done project management before and I didn't really know a lot about it. But the more I get into it, the more I realize that this is a profession that everybody knows and nobody knows at the same time, right? Everybody's done a little bit of it. Even as a secondary school maths teacher, I used to teach critical path analysis by hand. And then I realized I had no idea that was an optimization technique not used by project managers. I just thought it was an maths topic that was going to be assessed for A-level students, So, yeah, we've all done something somewhere on it, I think.
That's so interesting. Project management is just a part of our lives. Give us a little bit more information about the Association for Project Management, or APM. How long has APM been about? Where is it headquartered? And you said it's a charter organization. Tell us more about that.
That's right. Yeah, so we're primarily based in the UK, although we do operate internationally. Obviously, we're particularly strong in some of the Commonwealth countries, as you would expect, being a kind of UK-based organisation with a royal charter. But not exclusively, there are other areas, the Middle East being a good example, and some parts of, Southeast Asia and so on, where we're growing pretty quickly as well. But essentially, we've been around for just over 50 years. We've got around about 45,000 individual members. We work with around about 500 corporates, and we have around 250,000 qualification takers every year, who are taking an APM qualification or becoming chartered.
If you're thinking about some of the key challenges that project managers are facing, how is the APM working to address those challenges?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think probably one of the challenges the profession has is that it's a relatively immature profession compared to other well-established professions. So if you think of finance or HR or marketing, law. These are well-established professions with hundreds of years behind them, and people know what they are. They've heard of them. They know what it takes to get there and to be one. Even if you're not one, you know what it is. When we talk about the project profession, not even just project management, but broader, the project profession, what is a chartered project manager, a chartered project professional? What does that mean? Have people heard of it? Are the children in school saying, when I grow up, I want to be a project professional? I don't think they've ever heard of it. So there is this image problem that we have, which I think is partly about maturity, but I think it's also partly something that we kind of bring on ourselves as well. So as an example, and you can try this out, your listeners can try this out, right? When you're at a party and you meet a project professional, you ask them what they do. They will never say, or very rarely will they say, I'm a project manager and I work in the health sector or something like that. They're much more likely to say, oh, I work in the health sector and I do project management. And what I mean there is they associate with their sector before they associate with their profession. And we don't see that in other professions. If I meet the lawyer, they will tell me they're a lawyer before they tell me what firm they work for. We know which sector they work in. So I think that's really interesting. So that's part of it. The other bit is, of course, about the image problem is this trial by media that happens. When do we hear about project management, right? It's never good news, right? It's always projects that have gone wrong. They're late. They're over budget, all of this kind of stuff. And especially if they're publicly funded projects, right? And I understand that. But we've got to be better at shouting about the really brilliant things that the project profession does. And we're not so great at that. The architects are good at that. When they build something brilliantly, great new designs, and they celebrate how good it is. When we finished a project, we're just like, we move on to the next one now, and we move into, benefits realization, and we don't really kind of celebrate in the same way. So we've got to get better at that. But there is an image problem. That is, for me, the number one problem that we face as a profession.
That's so interesting. I haven't thought about that. It's like the project manager is seen as this public scapegoat if things go wrong. That is an image problem. I haven't really thought about that. I think I've been fortunate to be on projects that were either below the radar of, big public interest, or they've been successful. So, there hasn't been, you don't have to have this sacrificial person that you offer up to the public and say, okay, be mad at this guy. Bill blew this up. He messed up, But
look, we have this program, The Apprentice. Yeah, you know The Apprentice?
Yeah.
Right. So every week on The Apprentice, what happens is they say, you can be the project manager this week. No, you wouldn't do that for any other role, would you? You wouldn't say, you can be the accountant this week, or you can run the HR department. But for some reason, we think this is okay. You can be the project manager this week. And guess what? At the end of the episode, they fire him or her for doing a bad job. What qualifications did this person have to be a project professional? But again, that's the exposure that the general public has to our profession. We've got to get better at that.
Yeah, that's such good points. And when you're saying them, I'm like, yeah, that's so true. I'd never thought of it before, but that's really, really good. What skills do you believe are critical for project managers today?
I think we tend to focus on competencies rather than skills. And we kind of break the competencies down into 4 broad areas at APM. And there's a lot of them, but the 4 broad areas are setting up for success. So in there, we'd have things like writing business cases, financial management, sustainability, those kinds of things, governance. There's kind of preparing for change. So that would be things like, how do you do effective procurement? What does good assurance look like? Benefits management and so on. You've then got people and behaviors, and that would be things like conflict resolution, leadership, team management. And then lastly, planning and kind of managing deployment. And this is where maybe some of the more technical side of the profession comes in. So things like quality management, schedule management, budget, cost control, risk management, all of those things which we might traditionally associate with project management. But what's really interesting, there's a breadth and complexity to these competencies, which I think is unrivaled actually by probably any other profession. And there's a kind of cross-functionality about this as well, because this is one of the few roles that I think if you put them in an organization, often the project manager really has that breadth to work across the role in a way that probably only someone like a CEO does. So I've got a theory, no evidence to back this at all up other than a hunch really, but I've got a theory that probably those people who've got project management somewhere in their background, it's a pretty good basis to go on a kind of C-suite role, particular CEO role, because of that breadth of exposure to the organization, that functional breadth, and also the kind of breadth of complexities and technical skills that you have to have as well.
I agree with that. It's so true. And It's something that I know when I was first kind of making the transition from being a project manager into training on project management, it really struck me that, just to echo your point, many times C-suite, either people that aspire to be in the C-suite or people that have arrived there do have a background in managing projects, whether they were called a project manager or just they were tapped to lead one from time to time. It gives you so much exposure. You have to learn so many of these skill sets. You talked about these 4 different groups, but thinking about people and behaviors, that third group that you mentioned, there has to be a level of competency for that project manager to be able to get people fired up about the vision of their project, what they're trying to get done, and then all on board and pushing the same way, aligned, so that they can achieve that goal. And many times that's very similar to, running a department or running a team or running an organization. So yeah, it really does. It parlays well into future opportunities, even C-suite opportunities with an organization.
Yeah. Interestingly, if you're brought in as a leader of an organization, sometimes you'll come into an organization and you won't be a domain expert. So you won't have a background in that particular context, but you have to use your leadership skills, right? And then become a domain expert in effect, right? You have to learn that. I think that's quite similar to what happens in project management. You might be running a project that's in a completely different domain than the previous projects that you've run. I talk about the maturity of the profession before. This is one of the areas where I think we could do better. Yeah. So if I take a particular sector, let's say, I don't know, nuclear, right? Nuclear energy, building nuclear power stations or something like that, right? Mm. If you talk to the nuclear sector and they're appointing project professionals, almost always they will say something like, we need somebody who's got experience of nuclear. And I say, really? When you're appointing your accountants, do you say they've got to have experience of nuclear? When you're appointing your marketers, do they have to have experience of nuclear? You've got the nuclear experts there. They are important. That's not what you're looking for in a project professional. You're not looking for domain experts. You're looking for project delivery expertise. And they're 2 different things. And once we kind of get past that barrier and we accept that actually it's okay to move between sectors, then that's when we'll get some really good cross-pollination of expertise. Moving. And that's one of the things I think is holding the profession back from really maturing more quickly.
Yeah.
So we also want to talk about stereotypes in project management. I know this is something that you've also spoken a lot about. And so we really want to pick your brain on just some of the common stereotypes that you've seen in project managers.
I'm going to say there are 2 obvious ones that come to mind. So the first one is that there is an assumption when someone talks about a project manager that all they're doing is kind of, I don't know, they just sit there all day doing Gantt charts and it's kind of some kind of admin type thing. They think it's a kind of administrative or a technical profession. And, don't get me wrong, there are some very technical parts of it and there are some administrative parts of it, as there are in every profession, I would say. But the bit they often overlook or don't realize is the strategic aspect of project delivery. So when we talk about something like benefits realization, we're talking about making a decision now that's going to deliver benefits in 15, 20, 30 years' time to stakeholders that don't even exist yet. That's really strategic and it's a real boardroom type discussion. But people don't think of project managers as doing that. They think they're kind of the decisions made in the boardroom and they're just somehow involved in just the delivery bit of it. And so I think that's one of the big misconceptions. The other one, which maybe was obvious when I was talking about the competences earlier on, is that people think that all project managers care about is process. And actually, it's so much about people. It's unbelievable. And the real test for this is, I always say this to people in the profession as well. Think of a project, and you could do this if you're in a business, in any business as well. Think of any project that's gone either really, really well or one that's been a complete disaster. I'm hoping everybody would have at least one of those, maybe both. And now think about what was the determining factor that made that a real success or a problem. Was it people or a person, or was it a process that particularly drove that outcome? And most of the time when I ask this question, they say, yeah, it was that person or it was that group of people that really determined the outcome. And if that's true, then project delivery is as much about, if not more about people than it is about processes. And that for me is a huge misconception that exists.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. People over process. You can beat on that drum every day of a project. I think it's especially important for project managers that are leading teams to be reminded of that. I mean, they may even have to put a sticky note on their screen, on their monitor to be reminded, especially if they have that bend towards the technical. Like you said, analyzing the Gantt charts or doing resource allocation. That may be like a comfort place for them. but people over process it rings true. Anytime you're researching successful projects, that just comes through. So talk to us about, you can take that example or take the need to be strategic as a couple of stereotypes to overcome. What are some strategies that you found to be effective in addressing stereotypes?
Sometimes it's just about the terminology that we use. Weirdly, if you use the actual words project management, people immediately have an image in their mind of what they think that is. And it's not usually a good one, right? So I've had this before. I've tried this when I talk to people who are outside of the project profession. Maybe they're on a C-suite in a particular organization. Maybe they haven't got a formal project function in their organization. If I talk to them about project management, they kind of think, oh, it's not really a C-suite issue, is it? It's not really a leadership thing, it's a kind of technical thing. If I have exactly the same conversation, but instead of using the word project management, I say strategy execution. Well, I'm very interested in that. Absolutely. And it could be exactly the same conversation apart from the framing. So there is something around the terminology that we use. And ironically, I've found sometimes you need to start by talking about the value and the benefits of a formalized project delivery function before you actually say what it is. Because then people are interested and they go, yeah, this is something that my organization is going to need. And then you can have a proper conversation. So I think that the kind of terminology is part of it.
That's a strong point. Adam, just a follow-up question on that. How can project managers effectively communicate their value to the sponsor, management stakeholders when they're having to overcome those assumptions about their role as a project manager?
Yeah, really good question. So I think sometimes, not that I like to answer a question with a question, but I think project professionals could ask this question, which is, if you think about what leaders in businesses are actually doing and what they're delivering, and what the balance is between business as usual versus delivery of change, how has that changed over time? So I would posit that 50 years ago, most leaders were doing a lot of business as usual and probably a small amount of organizational change. And I'd say that's now probably completely reversed. Yeah. And that most leaders are doing a lot of change all the time, not least digital transformation, which seems to be what every organization's kind of looking at the moment. If that's true, then it brings a few things to the fore. So one is project delivery and project management, the project profession. It's all about delivering change effectively. So why wouldn't you invest in that area if that's what your business is about? But it also makes you ask important questions about the C-suite and the nature of the C-suite. Most C-suites I look at, for example, they still have a chief operating officer. Chief operating officer, the COO role, was designed for businesses that were delivering a lot of business as usual. And it was all about optimization and, efficiency and all of this. If we're in a business that's really about change and transformation, do we still need a COO in the same way? Or actually, do we need a chief projects officer or a chief transformation officer or whatever we want to call it? So, does it have important questions for the whole makeup of the C-suite? That in itself, just that conversation, I think, will start to get you credibility and a seat at the table when it comes to some of these discussions.
I think as a follow-up to that, Adam, I think of conversations we've had on this podcast before. And I remember with Laura Bernard, we talked about the idea of the project leader meeting with that sponsor early in the project, one-on-one, where there's nobody else in the room to perhaps influence how the conversation goes, and just asking, what are your goals with this project? What is your pain point? I can read the charter, I can read the statement of work, etc. But you tell me in your words, what is it that you hope to change or to accomplish with this project? And to make sure that, as a project leader, my perception of success and value is completely aligned with the most important person, the sponsor, who has put their name on this project. So, from a kind of a grassroots standpoint, I think that's a great move for the project manager. Just to clarify up front, what is the value that you really want to see from this project? What is it that you want me to change? And then once I have clarity on that, I can get a sense for what do you think are the obstacles that as a team leader, I'm going to have to face? Because then it's natural, I think, for that project sponsor to say, and here's how I'm going to help you on that.
I'd agree with that. I think what's really interesting, you just prompted another thought in my mind, which is the role of the project sponsor. This role is in some ways the best and the worst of projects, because if I was to get 1,000 project sponsors in a room and I was to say, put your hand up if you've had any formal training or development in how to be a really effective project sponsor, I would bet that it's a handful, less than two hands, right? So I think there is something there about, given how critical that role is in the way you've just described, having that buy-in from the C-suite in the first place to say, if we're going to have project sponsors and want to spend these potentially hundreds, thousands, millions of dollars or whatever on things, we got to make sure that we're investing in training, not just for the delivery side, but also on the sponsorship side as well. I find it always fascinating. That's the most under-invested area when it comes to development.
It's a great idea, too, for organizations, as you're just making me think of that, Adam. For those that are listening that are project managers that have been frustrated by that, okay, my sponsor's unrealistic, or I've worked with 5 different sponsors in my organization. These 3 were fantastic. These 2, not as much. So how can I raise that level from an organization standpoint and help people understand? How can we train up our sponsors? How can we make the sponsors and the PMs work more effectively together?
Yeah, not all sponsors want to be sponsors, right? It's a bit like, the apprentice thing I was saying earlier on. This week, you can be the project. That's what happens sometimes. The CEO says, right, you can be the project sponsor. Oh, right, thanks. And it becomes a side of the desk type conversation. So that's, I think, the most dangerous situation, because they are critical, actually. They play an absolutely critical role.
Rin Love here with a glimpse into projects of the past, where we take a look at historical projects through a modern lens. The project featured today changed the physical, political, and cultural landscapes of North America. The Transcontinental Railroad. Made possible by the Pacific Railways Acts of 1862 and 1864, work on the Transcontinental Railroad officially began in 1863. The intent was for 2 railroad companies to undertake the project, with the Central Pacific Railroad starting work in the west and heading east, and the Union Pacific Railroad starting in the east and heading west, hoping to meet in the middle. While the Central Pacific Railroad was able to start work in 1863, the Union Pacific Railroad was delayed by the American Civil War and broke ground 2 years later in 1865. Building the railroad was an enormous undertaking, fraught with many challenges. The crew coming from the west was tasked with tunneling and blasting through the solid granite of the Sierra Nevada mountains. From the east, workers laid railway across the Great Plains and over the Rocky Mountains. Overall, around 21,000 laborers, including Chinese immigrants, Irish immigrants, and Civil War veterans, laid 1,800 miles of track. The project was marred by financial scandals. The head of the Union Pacific Railroad nearly bankrupted the organization by siphoning the funds for personal use, and executives of the Credit Mobilier Construction Company wildly inflated construction costs and profited from fraudulent contracts. The financial fraud was far-reaching, even implicating a number of U.S. congressmen. The total cost to build the Transcontinental Railroad was massive, estimated at around $60 million at the time, which is around $1.2 billion in today's dollars. This figure includes not only the expenses of labor, materials, and engineering, but also the bribes and financial manipulations that plagued construction. On May 10, 1869, both railroads reached Promontory Summit, and a ceremonial golden spike was driven into the final tie, symbolizing the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. This event marked a major milestone in American history, celebrating the linkage of the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. So was this project a success? Technically, yes. The railroad was successfully completed and drastically cut travel time across the continent from several months to about a week. This effectively opened the West, facilitating the mass movement of goods and people across the country. Though the construction of the railroad spurred industrial development in the United States, the project also had significant social and environmental consequences, increasing racial tensions and permanently altering the landscape. All that being said, parts of the Transcontinental Railroad are still in use today, many decades later. Thanks for joining me for a look into the projects of the past. I'm Rin Love. See you next time.
Talking about stereotypes in project management, there's also a lot of project management in unconventional fields. Now, we saw that APM has done research and collaborations with organizations like PwC, and you've looked at the economic and strategic value of applying project management principles in unconventional fields. What were some of the insights that you gained from that research?
Yeah, so the study you're referring to is called The Golden Thread. which we commissioned PwC to do for us. It's the second time we've asked them to do it. So we asked them to do it back in 2019, so just pre-pandemic, and then we kind of recommissioned the same piece of work in 2024 just to see how things had changed. And bearing in mind, there's been a pretty, global seismic economic shock during that period.
Yes.
You might expect that there'd be some big decline in things like investing in projects and so on. In fact, we've seen the opposite, which is interesting. To put this in context, some of the figures in here. So the gross value added per year by the project profession, and this is just in the UK alone, right? It's not even globally, is 186.8 billion pounds a year. So to put that in some kind of context, if I was to just look at the entirety of, say, the City of London, so the financial City of London, that's about 101 GVA. So, it gives you some sense of the scale, and it represents 9.2% of the total UK gross value added. And then the workforce that kind of supports that represents about 8.5% of the workforce. And so you might say, well, hang on a minute. I don't know any project managers. Like, where are these people? And the problem is they're not always called project managers. I think you referred to this earlier on. They have all kinds of weird and wonderful job titles. And there are some people who are called project managers who also don't do project management. Yep. So that's where the language becomes, I think, interesting. In the UK, we see more than 2.3 million full-time equivalents actually doing project roles. And both of those figures are an increase on 2019. So in the case of the full-time equivalents, the kind of number of people, that's up by 8%. And the gross value added figure is up by 19%. So these are pretty big increases. But probably the really interesting thing about this study is, despite the fact that we've got this big increase in the number of people doing projects and the gross value added, it's still not enough. And we've seen that globally. By 2030, we are still going to need another 25 million project professionals globally. 25 million, to deliver on things like the UN Sustainable Development Goals, some of the big national infrastructure ambitions that countries have. A lot of this, of course, or some of this is down to some of the things that are happening in the Middle East, so things like NEOM and, KSA and so on. So there's some really big giga projects and mega projects that are kind of putting huge strain on what is an already constrained system.
Adam, quick question on that. The study is called The Golden Thread. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And is there a way that our listeners could access that? Could they go to the website?
So if they were to just do a Google search for Golden Thread APM PwC, it'll for sure be the first one that comes up.
Perfect.
And the other bit that your listeners might be interested in is we also did a breakdown of where are these project professionals, which sectors are they in?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I think the stereotype, we're talking about stereotypes, you might expect, project professionals, they're probably all in construction, infrastructure, telecoms and so on. Actually, the number one sector is professional and business services, law, management consultants and so on. Then financial services, hospitality and leisure. Hospitality and leisure, the number of project professionals in hospitality and leisure is bigger than the number of project professionals in IT.
Huh. Wow.
Now, I think that's staggering, right? You think about digital transformation, or you think, well, there must be tons of project professionals in there, but there are more in that space. Even things like pharmaceuticals, right? Now, there's quite a lot in that space. Development of new drugs and so on, and vaccines, and maybe they've been supercharged by events of the last few years. Who knows?
Yeah.
But that's a really interesting read, just looking at the breakdown by sector and how that's changed over the last 5 years. Some of those have gone up, some of those have gone down.
A follow-up question I want to ask, I'm really curious. There are different industries that simply don't employ formal project management practices. Some industries, like you mentioned, construction and IT, project management, and the role of the PM has been pretty much at the forefront there for many years. But there are other industries that just don't recognize the project management role, or the role itself is not as defined as well in those industries. So what advice do you offer for a project manager who's trying to lead change in those types of industries where project management is just not as mature?
It's a really good question. I think there's two kind of aspects to the answer to this. So I think part of it is about what you can do internally, and part of it is how you leverage the kind of wider set of peers, if you like, the wider profession behind you. I think in organizations where this isn't happening, it's often not a deliberate attempt to bypass what is a recognized profession. It's because they don't know. So it's the age-old problem of how do you educate someone who's in a senior position without making them feel stupid, right?
Yeah.
And one of the ways to do that is to go on the journey together, you know? So I think if you set this up as I know an organization that's done what we're trying to do really well, it'd be interesting to find out what their lessons learned are. You know, what mistakes did they make along the way? What did they say really well? Shall we go and look at that together? And guess what? This is going to be an organization that really is invested in formal project management functions and so on. So, you know, I think things like that are really helpful. But also even just things like sharing really effective practice that's out there, thought leadership papers. We do CEO roundtables, for example, with a mix of those organizations that have invested and haven't. Just not particularly because we want to push this agenda, but just to share practice and so on. And this stuff then happens organically. So if you're that person internally and you're engaged with your peers through a professional body, it doesn't have to be APM, other professional bodies are available. You know, then actually tapping into those kind of opportunities for thought leadership for decision makers in your organization can be a really non-threatening way to kind of get that across. I think what I definitely avoid is telling the leader that they don't know best. That is always going to land badly, even if it's true.
That's a great way to step off the end of the pier. Yeah, bad idea.
You know, we haven't really talked about project success and what we mean by project success. But one of the kind of strap lines that we have in the organization, which I'd really love, is because when projects succeed, society benefits. So we actually have an intrinsic link between project success and societal benefit. And we believe that if you deliver a project well, then it should benefit society. And when you start thinking about it through that lens, and, you know, we talked about benefits realization earlier on, it's quite hard to find one that doesn't. Now, sometimes I've been in rooms where people say, come on, Adam, what about if a country decided to invade another country? You know, you wouldn't want that project to succeed, and that doesn't, you know, benefit society. And I said, well, even if they managed to do that, I don't think that would be a success under what I think of as project success. Project success, in my book and in APM's book, is something that makes the world a better place by definition. Now, how do you do that? Well, some projects will just do that by nature of what the project is. You know, if I'm working on a project that's going to find a cure for some deadly disease, clearly that's going to help, right? So some things just do it by definition. In other cases, it's about how you do it. So things like sustainability, you know, if we're going to be doing a construction project, for example, thinking about the circular economy and how we do that in a way which is going to help us to benefit the environment better. That is a societal benefit. The fact that there is an economic contribution is a societal benefit. So you get some of these intrinsic things. Things like having on your project team diversity of thought is going to result in better project outcomes as well. And in fact, we've got a great piece of research, another piece of research that your listeners might be interested in, which is called Dynamic Conditions for Project Success, where we actually kind of looked at projects that have been really successful and said, what were the things that really made it successful for those projects? And the obvious things were in there. There was good planning, there was good, you know, assurance, there was good leadership, all the things you'd expect. But guess what else was in there? Project teams that were more diverse were more successful. You know, projects that had sustainability built into them from the outset, they were more successful. So, you know, this whole point around ESG, they're not just nice things to do, they actually result in more successful projects. So for me, these things of project success and societal benefit, they are intrinsically linked together.
You know, as project leaders, we're working with teams. We're working with people. You know, it's kind of back to that mantra of people over process. People are smart. They know they can look at a project and go, yeah, this is something I'm excited about because it's going to improve this part of our business, or it's going to make this product better for our customers. And they also can see when, all right, this is like a money grab. You know, I can see that this project is going to set us up maybe for more sales with this product or whatever, but wow, look at the bad impact it's going to have on the environment. Or look how it's going to take advantage of one group over another. So, you know, people are smart. They can sniff that out. So for us to have clarity on what is our project success, what is the impact it's going to have on society, then it sets us up for genuine conversations with our team and everybody's on the same page and gets excited about it. So yeah, this all rings true.
And of course, that might change. Like what you think is success to the beginning might change. There are some people, right? And you know, I've seen this even in some of our own materials where it's all about time, cost, quality. And I get that. That's important. I'm not saying that's not important, but it's not the only thing that determines project success. And what I've seen before is this kind of what are project outcomes and what are the benefits. And obviously your listeners will know that they're different things. But sometimes I see people judging project success on the outcomes rather than the benefits. So they'll say, look, it was delivered on time within budget and it met the required specification. That's a successful project. They have a great analogy for this in the Netherlands. Some of your listeners will have heard this. It's a medical analogy where they talk about a project which has delivered all of its objectives but delivered no benefit. And they say, the operation was successful, the patient is dead. It's slightly tongue-in-cheek as the Dutch are. But, I love the expression, yeah? And we see that, right? We see these projects. Yeah. IT projects are the worst ones for this, because sometimes by the time you've delivered the IT project, the business case for it is no longer valid. Yeah. So, yes, you've done everything it said in the original business case, but you've delivered zero benefit.
Yep.
If you could give some advice to aspiring project managers, especially project managers who want to challenge the status quo and bring those benefits, what advice would you give to them?
I have one bit of advice which was given to me years ago, and it stuck with me, and it was helpful both in my more junior and early roles, and it's still helpful now in kind of executive leadership and board roles. And this is the advice. It's about picking your battles. They've got to be small enough to win, but big enough to make a difference. Huh. And if they don't sit in that sweet spot, leave it well alone.
That's fantastic. Can we put that on a T-shirt?
Yeah, that's really good.
Well, it's not mine, so I don't mind. Yeah.
Super. That's really good, Adam.
If our audience wants to find out more about APM or reach out to you, where should they go?
So if they want to reach out to me, LinkedIn is probably the easiest place to do that. So I'm easy to find. I'm just at Adam Bodison. And equally, Association for Project Management is also on LinkedIn. And we have the website, of course, apm.org.uk, where you can find out all about membership, qualifications, and chartership.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for your time, Adam.
It's been a pleasure.
It's a fresh perspective, and it's been just a pleasure for us to talk through some of the challenges that project managers face and hear your advice. Thank you so much for this.
No problem at all. Thank you very much.
Excellent.
That's it for us here on Manage This. Thank you for joining us today. You can visit us at velociteach.com, where you can also subscribe to this podcast and see a complete transcript of the show. Now for our chance to give back. You just earned your free PDUs by listening to this podcast. To claim them, go to velociteach.com, choose Manage This Podcast from the top of the page. Click the button that says Claim PDUs and click through the steps. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep tuning in to Manage This.